Hey, everybody. Welcome to What Drives Us, episode 350 for January 22nd, 2020. My name is Russell Frost. I am your host for this week's journey into sustainable energy and advanced tech mobility. I was trying to mix that up, and it didn't. It just, I totally, I don't need to do that anymore. So all I'm going to say is we've got a big panel. We've got a special guest. We've got great stories. I'm going to introduce my co-host and wingman on this show, Mr. Tony Schaefer, so that we can get this show on the road.
Yeah. Hey, everybody. Happy new decade. And happy birthday to everyone on the show and everyone who's listened there. I know there are a few people who have watched or listened to almost every show in the last 10 years. And I want to say thank you very much. Shout out to Deschutes. I'm drinking a Deschutes Christmas beer.
Hey, that's my neck of the woods.
Yeah.
Good job, Tony.
It's darn good.
Well, and that man who says he lives in that neck of the woods is our friend, Mr. Patrick Connor. Hello
from Oregon, where we have a lot of great beer that Tony's welcome to drink whenever he'd like.
There. You know, that's a nice thing. That's a nice thing to have.
Yeah.
Our friend in the Mid-Atlantic region, he has his own YouTube channel and so much more. Mr. Casey Green.
Hey, everybody. It's a little chilly out today.
Yeah, you guys are in the middle of it, aren't you?
Yeah. We apparently Mark's a degree warmer than we are up there in Canada.
Is it?
Yeah.
If it makes you feel any better, Casey, it was really cold here today, too.
Whopping 65 degrees.
How did you know? Did you look it up?
No.
It was cloudy all day. I almost got a coat. Yeah, okay, I know. And that man shaking his head is our friend from Canada. He's not the president of Canada. The president of Canada is not here with us this week, but he is the man in charge of the Waterloo Regional Electric Vehicle Association, and maybe the OEVA too. Why not? I just put Patrick out of a job.
Oh, man.
Yeah, we have elections periodically. Mark.
Welcome, everyone, to the show. We've got some interesting stuff lined up for you today, for sure.
Absolutely. And our technical friend, the owner and founder and main technician and chief beer collector at Boulder Hybrids, Mr. Paul Guzik.
Hey, it's good to be here.
Thank you so much.
Brew, Paul? What's today's brew? What's today's brew?
Today, drum roll, hazy pale ale. I think I had this one before.
Oh, I thought you were asking for a drum roll.
Hazy pale, nice.
Yeah.
Yes,
drum roll.
And last and not least, you saw him on our October 15th. It was episode number 7 of What Drives Us One-on-One. He is a hydrogen fuel cell engineer and also does a fine job of collecting EV sales data for Canada. All-around good guy, Mr. Matthew Klippenstein.
Oh, thank you very much, Russell. I've got my my SodaStream non-alcoholic beverage up here. So thank you. Just as a highlight, I have. Oh well, there you go. Yes, you're caffeinated, but still non-alcoholic. It looks like. So I've worked in the fuel cell sector for probably about 15 years. I did also do a few years in the wind and solar consulting space, and I also worked with a nonprofit for a couple of years on EV infrastructure, with some continued consulting going on in that sector. So I try and be as tech agnostic to solutions as possible, I guess you'd say.
Absolutely. You know, as I mentioned to Mark, it's really, before the show, it's really just me trying to up the Canadian quotient. If I keep two Canadian
people to represent, in Hollywood and elsewhere.
Well, I have this deal with the government of Canada. If I have 2 Canadians on every show, they send me a stipend.
So if you have 3, one of us will have to speak French.
Well,
so.
I count as half a Canadian.
Yeah, you do.
That's another one of you then.
So 2.5 and 2.5.
Do we have to have more? Do we have to have more Canadians than Americans because of the conversion rate?
Our currency, Our hosts are 2/3 the American standard there.
Just a couple of business things before we get into Matthew's story. I once again last week, in between last week and this week, we celebrated our 10th anniversary. This show is 10 years old. That birthday was 2 days ago on Monday, January 20th, was when we did episode number 1. Danny and I, and Tony Schaefer was our guest.
Yeah, baby.
Yeah, and it was a riveting show of ums and ers and
How does
things
this
that
work?
I spent 4.5 hours, I think, editing that show.
Wow.
Yeah.
I can see where the gray hair comes from.
But it's still, it has a warm place in my heart or somewhere. So thank you to all of you for making this 10 years is great. And thanks to everybody on the panel and even Matthew, who's already, he's a What Drives Us veteran. I mean, he's already done an episode. So thanks to all of you guys who show up every week and make the show great. I want to shout out to our friend Michael Mannering, who is the composer, performer of our theme music. He allows us to play that for absolutely no compensation whatsoever. Talk about the best deal on the planet. And our friend, Dr. Evan Fusco. Last night in Evan Fusco's home, Michael Mannering played a concert. And I got pictures and video, and I talked to Evan today. Evan is unfortunately exercising his musical theater option tonight and not on the show. But I just, it was like it involved 2 people on the show, and I figured I should mention it. So cheers to them. I hear the concert went great. Evan had a wonderful time. Michael had a great time. I already got the playlist out of Michael because that's the kind of geek that I am. What'd you play? Come on, I want to know what you played. So, yeah. Yay, What Drives Us News. Okay, first story. I'm just going to turn it, because you know what? If I intro it, I'll intro it wrong. Matthew, tell us about your first story, please.
Sure. All right. So this story dropped, weirdly enough, on a Friday afternoon, which is generally not when you put forward massively good news. But up here in British Columbia, as a bit of background, we're mainly powered by hydroelectricity. We only have a couple gigawatts of wind capacity. And as a result, a lot of our decarbonization efforts can't just rely on switching the grid to make it cleaner. We have to tackle things like transport use, which we are doing. Our ZEV mandate kind of clobbers California, so it's a little bit of a yay BC here. Also, another big factor is decarbonizing natural gas. In the US, California has what's called a low carbon fuel standard that requires the carbon intensity of the gasoline sold to be reduced over time, whether it's through like addition of ethanol or other measures such as building charging stations, for example, to allow more people to buy electric vehicles. And so we have our first major project, like really major project in North America, to reduce the carbon intensity of our natural gas. And what we have is a more than 200 megawatt wind farm to be put in the windiest place of BC, very close to hydroelectric dams, powering an electrolyzer of greater than 100 megawatts, probably closer to 150 megawatts. And what will happen with this hydrogen is it will be injected into the natural gas pipeline, the main trunk line that goes down BC into Washington State as well. And it'll have a concentration of about 3%. 3% is still within the limits whereby regulations and specifications, technological settings everything is designed to handle at least 5 and typically more than 10%. Now, on its own, you won't be able to get into a low carbon or nearly low carbon world if you're simply relying on natural gas, of course, because that's ultimately fossil carbon. The very interesting and promising thing that this does is it creates a massive scale of hydrogen production, which can initially be used to decarbonize natural gas. With effort and momentum, the province's probable goal will be to switch out the natural gas infrastructure for a parallel or to reuse the infrastructure for hydrogen, for pure hydrogen, basically, and allow then have clean electricity as well as clean molecules, if you will, for other purposes. Now, in the continental United States and in Hawaii, this probably isn't too big of a deal because a lot of your guys' electricity or energy use peaks in the in the summer. I guess maybe apart from California, perhaps. California, the overall energy use might peak in the summer. But I suppose Midwest, other coastal parts of the New England, your energy use will peak in the winter. And then even though you might have a reasonable amount of wind, your solar definitely isn't going to help you there. So in British Columbia, we use about 1.5 times as much energy, like kilowatt hours, of natural gas as we use for regular electricity. So it's a very promising project. We'll have hydrogen at scale. We'll be able to use this to start peeling off carbon intensity from natural gas, as well as find other mechanisms for using the hydrogen. The British Columbia province's goals require that 15% of the energy in gas delivered in 2030, in natural gas delivered in 2030, be renewable. And so there's a lot of room to displace a lot of carbon, basically. Sorry, that was kind of a word jumble, but I didn't rehearse this like some politicians do.
It was a much better explanation than I could have managed. So let's
I have to. I'd say, Matthew, can you give us a quick? You were talking about using greener molecules or cleaner molecules or whatever. I was introduced in the article to two things I hadn't heard before. I believe, what was it? Blue gas, green.
Yes.
I'll let you drink.
Sure,
okay.
Sure.
So, yes. What exactly is this?
So this is all about making labels that are sort of understandable. The green hydrogen would be hydrogen from renewable energy, conceivably hydrogen from nuclear perhaps as well, but hydrogen generated from electrolysis from clean electricity. So fairly simple green. Blue hydrogen, the term started for use in Europe, refers to hydrogen generated from hydrocarbons or from fossil hydrocarbons where the carbon is captured and then sequestered. Now, the ultimate expectation, and Bloomberg New Energy Finance has written about this, is that in due course, natural gas that's used in industry and for heating could be more cheaply replaced by green hydrogen as renewables get so amazingly cheap. But there will be some years and some areas where blue hydrogen, even with the cost of storage, of capture and storage, will be less expensive than electrolyzing hydrogen. Does that kind of cover the?
I thought that was an interesting distinction. And we've said on the show, we've kicked hydrogen around, quite a bit. But the sticking point has always been that hydrogen is used more of an energy carrier than an energy source. That it takes more energy to create the hydrogen than you actually get out of it. And the one caveat we've always said is, if you can green the manufacturing of the hydrogen, then okay, we're on board. And it sounds like that's exactly what you're doing, or what's being done.
That is correct. That's right. So I guess, especially in North America, our natural gas is so cheap that it is likely that for years to come, especially up here in Western Canada, even if you take pessimistic assumptions about carbon capture and storage, we did a report on this for the province of British Columbia, that is likely going to be cheaper with a very, very minor, like 1/10 of the equivalent emissions of natural gas per unit energy, than you would get versus just consuming the natural gas. Not quite the same as green hydrogen, but very close in terms of ecological impact, and also very, very cheap, or much cheaper than you get with current utility or market prices. So it is also true, one of the prominent people here in BC who helped develop the BC carbon tax back in 2008, Mark Jacquard, has commented that it's not so much a question of efficiency, it's fuel switching. Ultimately, it doesn't matter as much if you're driving an e-bike or a battery electric vehicle, as long as that electricity is clean, ultimately. Now, there is congestion, and I anticipate that in 10 years, e-bike people will be haranguing EV drivers in much the way that EV drivers like to tease fuel cell vehicle proponents, because e-bikes are so much better, blah, 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 we're scaling up, you guys are so slow. But ultimately, it's the fuel switching which gives you the main benefit. Everything else is sort of secondary, really.
Yeah, Yeah.
Or sort of just adjust the amount of the benefit you're getting, obviously. If you're
Right.
super efficient. So, Matthew, I have a question. How does this potentially impact fuel cell motor vehicles? Like the Mirai or like the Hyundai or the Honda Clarity? I mean,
Right.
does this potentially mean that we finally have a better source for hydrogen?
This would in the long term. Now, so I've got a chart in one of the other articles I think I may have linked in the background. It sort of compares batteries to exoskeletons. So for small critters, you can't beat exoskeletons. They have some disadvantages when you get big, which is why your largest creature with an exoskeleton is like a crab, one of those underwater crabs. Whereas all the larger creatures tend to be internal skeletons, vertebrates, basically. And the same thing applies with batteries and fuel cells. Batteries are fantastic up to passenger vehicles and some buses, some urban trucks. But at a certain point, you get this trade-off where the advantage of energy density of the fuel carrier outweighs the inefficiency that admittedly you get if you're starting with renewable electricity to go all the way to hydrogen and then back, basically. So I would expect there'd be a similar kind of a trade-off. That is a fairly common assumption. I think Honda, in announcing its partnership with Isuzu recently, said that they figure fuel cells will be bigger for trucks and larger vehicles. Trains, for example, have been a big new sector for excitement. There's been a German train running on hydrogen for the past 18 months or so. And again, there the operator concluded that their battery would have to weigh 33 tons and require massive infrastructure spends to suddenly charge at the various stations. Mm-hmm. So it's very much a complementary thing. I think the major advantage with this project is more the Roger Bannister effect. So if you think of like Tesla had this thing where electric cars can be
4-minute mile guy.
Yeah, performance vehicles. With this project, it's like, wow, we can actually make hydrogen at scale from renewables. Now we can find uses for it, and it's a hell of a lot easier to drive your costs down for fueling, and find customers once they know, hey, there's a plentiful source of fuel that either we have at hand or we can generate with a little bit of consultation with renewable energy developers, of whom there are gazillions nowadays.
So I think it's a leap to go from we're generating it renewably to that makes it a great transportation fuel. We've talked about a lot of the problems, and generation of hydrogen is not really one of the big hurdles. It's distribution and a lot of other issues, and even electrolysizing it. That there are materials in the in that process that are consumed, and also, just putting it into the natural gas pipelines, you have to worry about hydrogen embrittlement. You're a hydrogen engineer. You should, I'm sure you know more about that than I do. And at 2 or 3%, maybe it's not a problem, but you talked about ramping it up, and 15, maybe even 100% at some point. I don't know that the infrastructure that we have in place for natural gas would be able to handle that at all.
Correct. So beyond a certain percentage, European countries typically have legislated 10 to 15% before having to requiring or by engineering expert analysis upgrades to your system. I guess the first advantage is achieving scale with something of this sort in North America or indeed worldwide. The second point is with respect to infrastructure, that tends to get changed on a generational basis anyways. So as part of the United Kingdom's plans, again, their fairly northern climate, their natural gas usage spikes phenomenally in the winter. Heat pumps lose some efficiency at the colder temperatures they reach up there. And they have a 6-phase plan to systematically switch over their natural gas systems to hydrogen systems in modules, basically, of at least the Britain, the main island. And so the conversion in British Columbia and elsewhere would have to be something similar. That takes time, but infrastructure you're always upgrading or maintaining over a long term anyway. So if you set a goal in the near term for a long term final point, you can have all the switch out of equipment on the pipelines, as well as equipment in final use cases, such as houses, for example,
Just like when
boilers
you,
and things of that sort.
just like
So
when you switch your nozzles, your injectors from propane to natural gas.
that would be something analogous to that. I think the UK in the 60s went from city gas to natural gas. They're basically saying, well, now this generation, we're going to have to go from natural gas to hydrogen. There would be some technology, optimization required, but then you do have a fair amount of lead time to do this. You're not doing this all tomorrow. And basically it's a system-wide impact, and that allows you to have the flexibility of something apart from relatively recently generated electricity to work with, basically. So again, in California, Hawaii, other southern climates, you're in a great shape to not have natural gas, for example, go to new houses, not have any gas energy inputs. But in somewhere like New York or Kansas or most parts of Canada, well, all of Canada really, there is probably a resilience backup benefit to having some gas able to come in apart from a battery, parts of which only cycle a couple times a year, right? You might cycle part of it daily, but the actual cost of that last portion could get onerous if you're only cycling it periodically.
So, in the transition period, are they extracting the hydrogen back out? Does it burn hotter? Does it burn more
Right, so
powerfully? How does this work?
Got it. So for this particular project, it's just being put into the pipeline. Through some of the work that I've done with folks involved in this type of activity, we have, for example, right now an effort to build a LNG pipeline to the coast to ship LNG to Asia. Now, a magnificent thing about LNG is that when you take the natural gas and liquefy it, you're already putting a lot of energy into making the stuff cold. If you blend in hydrogen and or have the pipelines able to accept a certain amount of hydrogen, then you only have to take the hydrogen from that already low temperature somewhat further to liquefy it. And then you'd be able to get LNG carriers going out as well as liquid hydrogen carriers, or alternately hydrogen in some other form, like a chemically bound form, something of that sort. So the expectation is that there would be parallel paths where some clients or some consumers might, like a large pulp mill, a large piece of industry, might be who is a large user of natural gas. It might be cheaper to have them switch over, use cheaply produced hydrogen instead, and therefore get up to that 15% of energy delivered by natural gas services be renewable, than to try and convert the entire thing to accept 15%, because there's always going to be like one brand of fireplace or whatever which is just sort of spits a little bit or is suboptimal at those levels.
So it wouldn't be the existing customers that that receive this enriched fuel at the moment. They would get it.
It would be enriched. It would be regular customers getting the 3%,
Okay.
which is what this project will do. Again, the thing is with BC, we use more natural gas than electricity, so all of our bragging about clean hydro isn't all that awesome considering how much natural gas we use for our houses. At 3%, at 5%, everything works. At 10%, virtually everything works. I think there were one or two consumer product brands who had one or two products that didn't work optimally. But well before then, the focus will be on fuel switching individual large carriers to hydrogen off natural gas, and then achieving this decarbonization of gas molecules, if you will.
So you're going to
So
be
is this kind of like flex fuel is in automobiles?
Yeah.
That would be yes. That would be that's a good metaphor to use. Yes, although flex fuels
Well, that's a whole different.
it should be somewhat
Yeah.
cleaner, I suppose, or more successful than flex fuels have been.
It's a corny solution.
Right. Apart from
Wow.
Brazil has an amazing has had some amazing success, but
Yeah.
yes,
Yeah.
corny
Does it
solution,
burn
true.
hotter, or does it burn more efficient, or?
It burns it. That's a good point. I once had those memorized. It burns pretty comparably hot. It carries 1/3 the energy per unit volume as natural gas, so you would have to increase flows eventually.
So it's a lot
But
like flex fuel.
Yeah.
yeah,
Right.
well, yes.
So you're just going to, this is a starter project to put 3% into the natural gas lines of hydrogen. And that will flow to whatever customers are hooked to the natural gas line. They will receive that 3% in their furnace or their industrial heaters or whatever they're using natural gas for today. And it will burn that additional 3% along with 97% of natural gas in whatever existing infrastructure exists today.
Is fully compatible. That's right.
Yeah.
So,
but does it affect the taste of your dinner on the stove?
Good question.
That's more your cooking, I think, the variability in your cooking than the fuel variability. But yes, so that is correct. Now, the treating chemicals as heat is like ridiculously wasteful. You know, natural gas is much more valuable as a precursor to plastics, preferably not single-use plastics, but than just burning them for heat value. And so the gravity, the market gravity, if you will be to pull this hydrogen into higher value use cases. One of which is fuel. When we think about trucking applications in particular, you can be much more expensive as hydrogen and still be competitive with diesel, as opposed to on natural gas in North America on a purely heat basis. So this first project really brings volume. It's like, hey, we have a 100 megawatt or 150 megawatt electrolyzer that will on its own like double that. That is like the yearly production of electrolyzers at the moment in the world. It's quite tiny. And so that will kick off cost declines. The availability of this fuel suddenly has already started to have trucking fleets saying, okay, well, look, if this stuff is being made, then maybe we have some diesel vehicles, up here in the north, where we can try this out on some of our routes, which we don't think are already adequately covered by batteries. And again, it's a very complementary thing. Everywhere batteries work well, batteries should absolutely be used. Everywhere that hydrogen works well, there's no reason to try and jam a battery in there. So in my experience, speaking with the BC Trucking Association, their use case is actually much more rigorous than a California one. And so for their long-haul trucks, they're very interested in hydrogen, for example. But for urban delivery trucks, absolutely, we have ample cheap electricity as long as you can bring in the infrastructure and don't cause substation builds from the utility. Absolutely go nuts.
So are they going to go with like a Nikola and go fuel cell, or are they going to do like BMW and just burn the hydrogen in
they would be fuel cell based. So the interesting one of the interesting charts they showed was that the high-end California truck, like the train, like a double trailer kind of a thing, was more like the BC mid-range in terms of weight plus range required between cities or things of that sort. But again, anywhere that I guess emphasizing my technology agnosticism, I love all my zero-emission solutions equally, and so there's everything right with getting battery trucks if they happen to work for someone.
So I want to say one of the charts that that I found fascinating is this one here, and I have to give credit to somebody named Matthew Klippen. So so
I don't even try and say it.
Right, yeah. So this is one of your charts, and I found this fascinating. Could you spend a few minutes just kind of explaining this?
Absolutely, yeah. So this is a very cool chart. I first charted a couple of 3 years ago in Green Tech Media, and to avoid someone else claiming naming rights, I've termed it Klippenstein's law. I'll happily give more deserving person in the fuel cell sector later. And basically what I found, again, having worked in solar and wind, I was always interested in how they scaled up. And you can actually see in this chart, if you look at the green and the red, you kind of see these little bumps where, Germany has a bit of a feed-in tariff, or, Japan or some other organization. So when these earlier industries were embryonic, were very nascent, you had this kind of very steady 40-ish% per year ballpark growth year over year. And then you had these sudden bumps, but they were remarkably similar on a logarithmic scale. Admittedly, on a logarithmic scale, everything looks similar. But when I took a look at the fuel cell production numbers, for the past number of years, they have actually followed along a very similar trend. And so I thought this was just interesting. This chart, at least based on near-term production promises, announcements from Toyota and Hyundai, stuff that they have announced are going to scale up in the next few years. This should be met for at least through 2022, 2023-ish. There are some longer targets where they've said, we want to have like 10 million vehicles around the world by 2030. And having been around the fuel cell sector for a number of years, I discount those long-term targets. But it will be interesting to see how long this trend continues to apply. And I guess the response that I would have, or the context for this, and context is always important, is that it wouldn't surprise me if batteries actually are increasing even faster at this stage because they are such a wonderful solution. Rather, it is that here's this technology that's kind of under the radar for a lot of people, just as solar was in the early 2000s, just as wind was in the mid 90s, and at some point. You get these growth rates start to hit an absolute value where people are like, this might actually have some value to it. So we'll see how long that trend continues.
Yeah.
Okay.
So basically, you're creating you're trying to start a market. You're producing hydrogen. You've got some place to place it to be used. Maybe not ideally where you'd like it used, but
Right.
you have a reason for producing it, putting it into the infrastructure, and then letting people know it's available for other purposes because you're already making it.
That's right. Again, it's this Roger Bannister kind of a thing where this is the first time in North America you're going to have this enormous supply created, a demonstration. Wow, this energy is available. We might have to build other projects to actually generate some for ourselves. But this is kind of this is like taking off the handcuffs of, natural gas reforming, which had earlier been commented on. And we have a low carbon fuel standard, much as California does. So when used as a fuel, it is possible to get credits for electric vehicles or for electric infrastructure and for hydrogen infrastructure and for hydrogen fuel in order to drive our emissions process down. So yeah, it's we get scale, we get attention, and then we build from there, exactly as has happened with battery electric vehicles.
Yeah, there's a law about that. Is it Maxwell's law? I don't remember which one it is. That how the price drops as manufacturing increases, standard economies of scale.
Oh yeah, the learning rate or learning curves. That's right. So actually, the learning rate on batteries over the long term, not the past couple of years, but I think BNEF had that at about 18% per doubling of cumulative production. And data from Japan, from one of their fuel cell pilots, they have 300,000 fuel cell residential units, basically providing the first kilowatt of power, in cases of earthquake and so forth, but also all of a household's hot water needs. So they've used that 300,000 unit data set to show that every time cumulative production doubles, it's about a 17-18% drop, which isn't surprising because batteries and fuel cells are quite similar. It's just that one contains the energy inside the canister, if you will. The other has an external fuel tank. They're all thin films, very similar materials. You use one type of metal for one, you use a different type of powdered metal for another. So yeah, that does apply there. In terms of the doubling, the hilarity, to put a nail on the point of how small fuel cells were until recently, when Toyota made something like 400 or 700 Mirai in like 2015, that doubled the entire worldwide production of fuel cells for that year. And the year they went to like 1,000 or 1,500, that was triple over 2 years ago. So truly embryonic, like science lab kind of scale. Now, as we get to larger scale, prices come down to where it starts to become interesting for more little markets. And then you add those volumes together, you get to price points. And with hydrogen as well, you get to lower price points where it becomes more practical. All of it complementary to batteries as opposed to in competition with them.
Now, when the Mirai fleet doubled and tripled, isn't that when they also exhausted the supply of available fueling stations capacity?
There are, so yeah, basically California is the only state really with hydrogen infrastructure. There are like more than 100 stations in Japan. There are 40 odd stations in Germany. The build out of hydrogen infrastructure is a barrier for hydrogen vehicles, of course, in much the same way for multi-unit buildings, for apartments and condos, which is where I was working in the EV space. The long process by which you typically have to obtain permission from your strata or your homeowners association is a massive barrier for people being able to choose electric vehicles. That kind of
Right,
might actually lead into the second subject, but yes.
I was going for like this way. The fleet was larger than the supply of fuel, not necessarily where you could buy the fuel, but like literally, if you lived in the zone of the station, it was either
Right.
low on pressure or low on fuel. Is
That's
that
right.
that same time frame?
So, so there are separate, what do we call them? Challenges, or I guess you call them teething issues with respect to the Mirai. I guess the Mirai I would compare with like GM's EV1. So I know the EV1 gets the saintly halo in the movies and stuff, but from my perspective, it's like a funny-looking two-door car. No one buys two-door cars, not much trunk space, blah blah blah. Whereas with the Leaf, Volt, and especially the Tesla, now it's like, hey, this is kind of, they worked out the kinks. There's actually some infrastructure around. It's not these weird 10 kilowatt, custom connectors. So I'm not at all surprised that they've had early issues in California with some of the fueling.
Was that a case of them oversubscribing? Like, hey, we've got enough fuel for 100 cars. Let's give them 500 cars.
Okay, I misunderstood. It wasn't a matter of consuming more hydrogen than they were able to refuel with. There were separate engineering part issues that caused shutdowns or low pressures. One of the fueling supplies, a refinery, as it turns out, had some issues with some of their equipment, which meant a temporary scarcity of local hydrogen. One point, again, with respect to scale, one of the larger electrolyzer units, electrolyzer companies, Nel Hydrogen. I own no stock in electric vehicle or hydrogen fuel cell companies. I'm a little bit smarter than that, although not for not having Tesla, I suppose.
Patrick just went, yeah, right.
So the electrolyzer company Nel, they also make hydrogen fueling stations. So they had recently a presentation showing that 10 years ago, they could dispense 100 kilograms of hydrogen a day, which I guess would be the equivalent of 20 fill-ups for 300 miles apiece of a Mirai, an Nexo, for $1 million. So $1 million for 100 kilograms. Ugh. But as the technology has scaled, even in that tiny sector, now for $1 million, they can give you 1,000 kilograms of hydrogen a day, which greatly spreads out how much you can spread out your capital costs and bring the cost of fuel down. So
it was a perfect storm, not a overzealous Toyota.
Oh yeah, it was definitely a perfect storm, or it is, I don't know, Murphy's Law maybe, if you'd like.
Yeah, that works too.
Well, and until you get more stations, if you have one filling station in the region and it's down, that's going to piss off everybody who owns one vehicle.
That's right.
Yeah,
you just described San Diego County.
Yeah,
one station.
If the gasoline station is down, you go down the street to the next one.
That's right.
But this is where the cost savings you're talking about come in, and the production increase for the station. Each station can handle more cars for less cost.
Or I was thinking while Matthew was talking, like fleet vehicles, like if you're the UPS hub or the Amazon truck hub, they could have fuel cell vehicles and their own fueling station to power their own fleet, perhaps.
Yeah, right. They can afford their own now that they can get enough.
Maybe not at $1 million a station, but maybe
probably not. Yeah.
Next generation.
If you've got a fleet of like 100 cabs, like Paris has, I think 100 hydrogen fuel cell cabs, they're getting up to 600 soon. As soon as you get to those high use vehicles, and again, this is where trucking is the major focus, I think, for most fuel cell companies, is that those guys use a lot of fuel every day because they're heavy and they're in use a solid 8 hours, if not 16 hours a day. Now, the reason to focus, at least in the immediate term, on passenger vehicles is that you sell a hell of a lot more passenger vehicles than you do, Class 6, Class 8 trucks. And so the kind of the equation is that there will be enough people who have these quirky tastes that they don't want to fuel up at home. Consumer markets are very heterogeneous. I can't imagine why anyone would want a loud, annoying, stinky Harley Davidson, but there are a lot of those guys around town. And yet, so if you can leverage those to get the trucks, you can get the fuel usage up, you can get the fuel costs down, and then you can provide for that, probably small fraction of folks who, for whatever reason, would prefer something that doesn't plug in.
So, is there a way to? I don't want to boil this down too much, but I mean, is there a way to say? So, is this obviously it's a step for hydrogen? I mean, but Matthew, do you think that this is going to lead to something else, or are we just really still trying to stimulate the market? I mean, are we going to see?
So, I think the market, at least in BC and Quebec, so. The two provinces in Canada with their own carbon tax are BC and Quebec. At least we started. Our federal government just got reelected. The federal government has imposed a carbon tax on the recalcitrant provinces. But in BC and Quebec, we have hydropower. So it was easy, and no oil sector, basically. So it was easy to put in a carbon tax. That was easy, but that also made everyone realize that, wow, we really need to decarbonize transport. We can't just switch from coal to natural gas and renewables and give ourselves a pat on the back. So I can't speak to specifics, but there are pilots and sort of proposals and RFIs in process that I might be able to talk about subsequently. Now, these won't have the same kinds of volumes as we'll get with electric battery options in the first number of years, but they will again round out that full spectrum of solutions, both on the trucking side, trains, marine, and even flight somewhat. We have a very cool company you probably covered already, Harbor Air, which demoed a test flight of its battery electric Otter seaplane. And,
yes, we did. We covered that.
Yep. And so for somewhat longer journeys, there is actually a California and UK-based company, Zero Avia, who is prepping their own 20 to 50 seater for sort of smallish regional flights.
Wow.
On fuel cell?
Fuel cells. And the fascinating thing is they don't even need the 700 atmospheres pressure. I think it's 10,000 psi that cars use. They can actually get most of their distance on 200 miles on 350 bar, which is the lower pressure that forklifts and regular trucks use with respect to hydrogen. It's a fascinating trade-off where basically if you go higher pressure, you need a stronger tank. Stronger tank means heavier and bigger, and that kind of gums up the aerodynamics for a plane. So it's this fascinating engineering optimization that they've been doing in terms of what's the optimum pressure versus weight of container to carry this hydrogen for this plane.
Now, does the hydrogen on board also make the plane lighter?
It's not helium, Tony.
That's fascinating. I don't think it wouldn't make it lighter because it is mass, but compared to a liquid fuel, yes, it's. I'm sure the pilots will have that helium voice as well.
That would be awesome. Hello, this is your captain speaking. We're preparing to land.
I think if you hop hydrogen,
it might be a
die.
tough sell to passengers to get on an airship vehicle that's powered by hydrogen.
That's right. Yeah. That's
So,
is
it
what's the onboard movie?
Yeah.
Hindenburg too. It's okay.
Yes.
Come on.
Yeah.
It's okay.
So
What could go wrong?
No one will use that word.
Non-name list or something,
Right.
This 20-seat vehicle, is it propeller driven or turbofan?
It is. I believe it's propeller driven. I can send it over, but I haven't got that memorized there, sadly. It is built off an existing frame, so it's like a glider. Essentially, they pulled out for the first designs. They've pulled out an existing. Was it a Cessna? Not a Cessna, but pulled out an aircraft from an existing manufacturer, and then retrofitted in the fuel cell stack with the fuel and other ancillary components.
Okay.
Wow. Anybody else have any other questions?
No, that's a lot of information.
Cool.
I'm gonna have to rewatch.
I'm full of it in every sense of that expression. So some more.
I'm sorry, Patrick. Did you?
Oh no, I was just going to say anything that reduces our fossil fuel use sounds great to me.
Absolutely.
Right. Yeah, that's
Yeah.
the ultimate goal there. The hilarious thing is that I have seen solar and wind guys take pot shots at each other, but not nearly as energetically as in other sectors.
Yeah. Well, we've said many times that diversity is a good thing, and diversifying power generation, storage, whatever, is good. It gives us multiple paths. Some paths are better for certain applications, as you mentioned with your skeletal comparison, which is actually really cool. Tony, thank you for putting that up. I don't know where you got that, though.
I got that from Matthew's article.
Oh,
Literally, I pulled it off of.
Someone reads the link.
wait, it's not in the article.
Not the article I got.
Somehow
No,
I
no.
missed it, but it's a really cool way of putting it, and that's a step forward is a step forward. We don't have to just do one thing, and that's a good plan.
And it's hard to convince people of that, which is the thing. Like Matthew said, you have the solar people taking pot shots at wind, and wind taking pot shots, and then, but and everyone's like, no, we have to be the silver bullet. And as we've said many times on our show, we have people who are hesitant to give up what they have because they're waiting for that one silver bullet, and it has to be perfect. And until it's perfect, I'm not going to make that leap. And it's so hard to convince people that the future really is a blend of technologies. You can't wait for that one silver bullet because it doesn't exist.
Right.
Perfect is
Silver
enemy of good.
buckshot.
Yes, silver buck.
Uh-huh.
I like that. Okay. I'm trying to decide. You know what, Tony? Let's just do your story because it kind of dovetails into this.
Right.
And
Yeah.
then I think we're gonna have to say goodnight.
Yeah, maybe. So I wanna start by just letting people know that the war on drugs brought us more drugs, and the war on terror has created more terrorists.
Yeah.
And thankfully, our president, Donald Trump, is not a fan of renewable energy, so he launched a war on renewable energy, which means that coal plants are shutting down as we get more renewable energy on the grid. So thanks for that, President Trump. So 2019 was the second fastest rate of U.S. coal power plants shutting down. 15.1 gigawatts of coal-fired energy generation capacity was retired in 2019 alone, which was the 5th consecutive year of lower fuel consumption, which remains at its lowest since 1975. So we are sort of rounding that bend. We're seeing, here I'm in a Green Car Reports article that the projections are that in 2020, new capacity is going to come from 44% wind, 32% solar, and 22% natural gas.
Mm-hmm.
And projected to be
coal plants?
5.77 gigawatts.
And then you've got Matthew
Sorry?
killing the natural gas too.
Any new coal plants on
That's
the
right.
horizon?
Exactly.
Not in the United States, yeah.
Yeah.
Right. It's time for the 1900s technology to become part of history.
Yes, that's right.
Yes. And so, Russell's right. I mean, this is exactly like what Matthew was talking about. We're finding new ways to green our energy. And Patrick has said this time and time again. That's not going to stop me for taking credit for saying that an electric vehicle, a battery-powered vehicle, will get greener as the grid gets greener. An internal combustion engine will only ever stay dirty. So we all want the grid to get as green and renewable as possible because our cars inherently will become more green and more sustainable.
Right.
Yeah, you could even argue that gas-powered cars are only going to get worse because as we move to as the light, sweet crude, easily accessible stuff is gone, you have to go deeper, you have to go farther offshore, you're more likely to have spills, there's more sulfur content, the processing time goes up, and all of that costs energy. So the ICE cars get browner and the electric cars get greener.
Well, plus they do.
And not to mention, as the ICE cars get older, their engines' emission systems don't work as well. Their piston rings get loose and they blow out crap out of the tailpipe. So
That's where I was going.
yeah,
Yep.
it's not just the fuel source is dirtier, the cars themselves are dirtier.
Yep.
Now, not to rain on this parade at all. It is very true that the light sweet crude is the stuff that's being depleted the fastest. The case of like shale gas and oil from shale formations in the States, which has had this massive resurgence in the sector, is a case where, as with battery costs, the cost of doing that went from like uneconomic 12, 15 years ago to the standard way that companies are trying to make a living with it now. So we don't want to get overconfident and assume like the fossil sector is never going to improve, because they will. As one case in our Alberta bitumen area, the tar sands, oil sands, whatever your preferred label, one of the companies, CNRL, one of the biggest producers, said that 10 years ago, their best cost per barrel for processing, so after they've done construction, but just processing it, taking this bitumen, which is kind of this tar substance, out of the earth, processing it into sellable light sweet crude, was $45 a barrel. And now they say it's about $18 a barrel, which is like a 60% drop, which is actually about on par with what wind has done. Now, solar and batteries are way better. They've done like 85, 90% in this time frame. But there's my message is that we don't want to get complacent and think, the only smart people are on our side, because there is still value for regulations to say that, we need to make sure this stuff is cut out of the system as soon as we can reasonably manage, because there are a lot of smart people in every sector, and we don't want to get blindsided by, suddenly oil. Like I think BP, maybe BNP Paribas, had said that oil will have to be at $20 a barrel to compete with electric vehicles in the future at some uncertain date. But if we give them enough time, I'm sure they'll get there with engineering. So our best bet is still to have regulations and ZEV mandates and other things to direct that innovation in the desirable direction.
Yeah.
Right, and as you mentioned, carbon tax.
Yes, that's right.
Yeah. They're driven by economic forces, and that they're going to do all they can to maximize those profits. You're right.
That's
And if the carbon is free, they're going to make us pay the cost.
That's right.
Yes.
And carbon is not free, as we're learning now.
Yep.
Yeah.
But what do they care if they don't have to pay it?
I mean that coal is free to stay in the ground now that Donald Trump's solutions have been so effective, and we're happy for it to stay free there underground.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah, we didn't leave the Stone Age for lack of stones.
Right.
And once they finalize clean coal, I think then I don't even have an end to that sentence, because the beginning of the sentence was the punchline itself.
Right.
Exactly.
Yeah.
It's kind of like a Jurassic Park.
But they had a good marketing guy
dinosaur
come
back
up
from the
with
dead
that.
kind of thing.
Yeah.
Punchline delivered, Mr. Schaefer. Let's do some shout-outs and go home, gentlemen. I think we've delivered a fine show. Paul, just because you've been there smiling patiently the whole show, I'm going to start with you, sir.
Yeah, I'll be quick.
It's okay. You don't have to be quick.
I'll just plug my business, boulderhybrids.com. Actually, no, it's Boulder Hybrids is a business. The website's boulderhc.com or boulderh.com if you're looking to get your EV or hybrid car serviced in the Boulder, Denver area. Check us out. Or if you need to buy a used hybrid or EV, which is a very clean and green way to get an electric car, we have cars for sale.
What's the special?
I got a couple of bolts in this week. They're not on my website yet, but should be
bolts with a B.
B with bolt. Actually,
Oh.
the way Chevy calls it now, the Bolt EV. Because too many people were going, Bolt, huh? What did you say?
Mm-hmm.
So the model name is Bolt EV.
So the new name is Boltev.
I got some Boltevs.
Yeah, it's a Boltev. It sounds very Eastern European.
Yeah. And Paul, I'm afraid that you're limiting your market area. You said Boulder and Denver. I say anyone in North America, if you have a hybrid or an EV that needs work, you have it towed to Boulder, Colorado, so Paul can work on it.
Get the
Yeah.
AAA membership with the unlimited towing. And,
Exactly. Yeah.
Paul will pick you up at the airport if you're going to buy a car from him, or if you're going to bring yours
Yes.
in.
Yes.
That's true. He will, at least until like 25 people email him for that, and then it's going to be all over. Hey, Paul, only because we've talked on the show, and I've talked about, I want this, I want that. I actually got a vehicle about a week and a half ago.
What did you get?
It is a new to me, but it is not new. It is, of course, a used BMW F650 GS. It's a motorcycle. For those of you that don't know, I am absolutely chuffed, as the British say. I love it. So, yeah, it's not
what kind
electric.
of fuel does it run on?
It runs on gasoline, but interestingly enough, it gets better gas mileage than my previous motorcycle, like significantly better mileage. Yet the engine is about 25% larger. I'm going to give that to the Germans for the engineering. But someday I would love to buy. You can't even find a used electric motorcycle. It's hard enough to find a new one, but finding a used one is like impossible. So someday I will be very happy to say on this show I have a brand new electric motorcycle, but not that day is not here yet. Casey Green.
YouTube.com/Casey Green. KACEYGREEN. Lots of great videos and more coming out soon.
Absolutely. Tesla supercharger reviews and lots more of the Tesla lifestyle. And speaking of the Tesla lifestyle, let's talk to the master of the Tesla lifestyle, the host of the Tesla Life, Mr. Mark Coughlin.
Hello, everyone. Just plugging our EV Association, Waterloo Region Electric Vehicle Association. You can find us on Twitter at WREVA Group. And you can check in with what we're doing there. More, as Russell mentioned, follow us at the Tesla Life and see what's happening in the world of Tesla.
Absolutely. And every once in a while I show up in that show just to inspire the much-loved Tesla Life drinking game.
Hang on. I'm sure you mentioned in the Tesla Life, but I saw the news headline, Tesla's now $100 billion company. Like,
the stock just keeps going up.
Paul, your investment advice last week, not buy it, didn't pan out so well. Just only the short term.
I didn't say don't buy. I said be careful because it's defying logic.
The new $100 billion evaluation has now triggered Elon's compensation package.
So now he got to hold it for 6 months, and he can get paid.
I'm sure that's purely coincidental. Yes.
Yes.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Purely coincidental.
Yeah.
Elon had no desire to pump the stock at all. It's all about saving the planet.
Well, it has to average that over 6 months, so just hitting it for a day is not enough.
Okay.
Right.
Yeah.
All right.
Speaking of the Waterloo Region Electric Vehicle Association, let's talk to the man with the other acronyms, Mr. Patrick Connor.
Hello. I'm going to give a shout out to a podcast called Drilled. So we mentioned how Clean Coal, what a great marketing campaign that
porn,
was.
is it?
No.
Good.
Although in some of season 1, she talked about how we really are screwed by fossil fuels, and that is what inspired the name. And so their season 2 has just started, and the last episode was talking about someone the guy who has invented the press release and the modern PR campaigns, where before people just had publicists, and this took a whole new tact to it. And the guy was a real slimeball. He worked for Standard Oil. He worked for coal companies. He actually worked for the German government in the lead up to World War II, trying to get good PR for America. When train companies had wrecks, he covered PR for them. When the government tried to get regulations to make sure they had a full crew complement to prevent safety accidents, he changed it and said, oh no, they're trying to make us have extra crew because the words matter. And so calling something clean coal or natural gas or whatever is all straight out of this guy's So anyway, check out Drilled, the podcast, and
the show icon is red oil derricks.
What's that?
The show icon is red oil derricks.
I don't know the
Yeah,
show
that's right.
icon.
It is, yeah.
Yeah.
I just looked
I
it
have-
up right now, and it is red oil derricks.
Perfect.
So,
Thank you.
so it's this was an interview with Satan. Is that what you're saying? I mean,
Yeah.
damn.
Yeah.
Wow.
So she's a reporter, and in the first season, they were going through a lot of court documents in the Exxon. What did Exxon know? When did they know it? What were they saying publicly versus what they knew internally? It's
horrifying.
Great. Yeah. There was a interstitial half season thing where she went off in a whole nother topic that I was less interested in, but the energy stuff has been great.
Wow.
That's cool.
Very cool.
Definitely some time for that.
I had a question for Matthew. I forgot to ask earlier.
Oh, sure.
Yeah.
Do you know if when they use hydrogen as a fuel, they're going to inject an artificial smell like they do to natural gas? So
Right.
if there's a leak, people will smell it.
That's right. So that has been discussed for a while. If and when they switch over to pure hydrogen for a natural gas pipeline, I would imagine they would do that again because it's colorless, odorless. It's again like natural gas, and so I would expect that would be the case. Now they don't use that in vehicles because they're trying to get down to just tiny tens of grams. Sorry, they are at tens of grams of platinum per vehicle now, so it's not as cripplingly expensive as back in the day, like 20 years ago. As a co-op student, as an intern, I would slather on platinum like a kid putting Nutella on toast onto these crystals. And now it's like laser deposition, like you'd get from like a
gold plating or something.
Stingy sandwich chain where they just sprinkle a very tiny bit. They missed a little bit of the of avocado or something on there. So so for the vehicles, you would not have an odorant, but I would imagine that they would have something like that for safety for a gas services, again to make sure that any leaks are easily detected and absolutely public safety is the first priority.
So on the 09 Honda Clarity, they the purple one, rather than a dome light, you actually had a hydrogen sniffer, and if it sniffed hydrogen, it would shut down the system.
Right. Yes. So that is, I believe, a common feature in all the commercial vehicles there. Yeah.
I think we should get to vote on what smell they're going to put in hydrogen.
Yeah, I'm done with farts.
Just stick with the rotten eggs. People know what that means.
Yeah.
All right. So back to my wrap up. I am with the Oregon Electric Vehicle Association. You can find us at oeva.org. Thank you.
Thank you. And our special guest, Matthew, thanks again for being here. Shout outs, anything you want to plug? Any messages?
Sure. Well, thanks very much for having me, guys. I guess I'll give a shout out to my kindred at Plug-in BC. That's the nonprofit where we're doing the work on EV infrastructure outreach. We did have the pilot project with the province, which got topped up with a generous amount of funding this year. So weren't able to include it in the show notes, but if at some point you guys want to discuss getting chargers into apartments, we've got some great graphs and data from like hundreds of installations, average costs, how these things broke down, not unlike what RMI has produced in the States. So big shout out to Plug-in BC guys and I don't know, other clean tech fans out there in Canada.
Thank you, Matthew. That's great. And I would apartment charging. That's definitely of interest to me. Well, last and certainly not least, Mr. Schaefer, bring us home, my friend.
Yeah, so if you want to read all the news that we're reading, including a whole bunch of Matthew's articles, check us out online. You can find us on Facebook at facebook.com/whatdrivesus. Make sure and leave us comments. You can suggest items. Send us anything that crosses your path. Send it to us on Messenger. We read all those. And if you use Flipboard as a news aggregator, be sure to subscribe to the What Drives Us magazine. I want to give a shout out to our very own John B., who couldn't make it on the show this week. He will be joining me at the Chicago Auto Show, which is only 2 weeks away.
Oh, God.
Yes.
No bail money is all I'm saying.
So wait,
You're on your own.
I thought the show posted bail.
No, not anymore. 2020, it's new year. Okay.
Yeah. Coughlin used up that curse.
I'm not saying where it went. I'm just saying that fund is empty. Well, or Tony.
No. That's it. Thanks to everybody. Thanks to all of our subscribers. The number keeps going up, which is awesome. So apparently we're doing something right. Thanks to the people who seriously, Russell always told me, don't read the YouTube comments. But I have to say, with very little exception, the people who reply to our videos, the people who write the comments, they're extremely intelligent responses, well thought out, meaningful. And thanks everyone who kind of gets us going and saying, hey, you guys are doing a great job. Really enjoy the show. Keep going. Except for Casey, because he replies to the videos. I don't read those.
You know what?
I'm time to the pump.
Right.
I'm going to add on to that because Tony and I actually do go in there frequently and respond to comments, sometimes at great length, and have discussions. So if there's something that you want to say, YouTube is another place to go and post a comment or post a question. And even if you say I'm ugly and I'm stupid and I don't have good ideas, I'm fine with that. That doesn't leave me much room to respond, but I've had a lot of discussions with people that have vehemently disagreed with points of ours. And so Tony, I have to kind of walk that back, that whole never read the comments on YouTube videos, which in general is a really good idea. Our subscribers, however, our viewers have done a really good job of asking great questions and interesting questions. Yeah. So cheers to all of you for that. Thank you.
Yeah.
As always, I want to thank Michael Manring for our amazing theme music. Visit him at manthing.com. For the love of God, please go buy a song, buy an MP3 somewhere on iTunes or something. Just don't buy anything on CD Baby.
CD Baby.
No CD Baby. No. Ixnay on the baby. But do support Michael Manring. Thank you, because he has supported this show for 10 long, thankless, and dollarless years. Of course, you can find us in social media all over the place. We are What Drives Us, Facebook.com/What Drives Us. We're at What Drives Us on Twitter. We don't like Instagram, so sorry. And YouTube.com/What Drives Us. Go there. Please keep subscribing. Please, again, share the videos that you like with your friends. And we thank all of you. Are we at 12:02 or something?
No. We're at 12:13.
That's crazy. Over 1,200. I love that. That's so cool. So on our 10th anniversary, our 10th birthday, it is wonderful to have 1,200 subscribers. Thank you so much for that. And keep subscribing. I'm going to thank Casey, Paul, Mark. No, I'm not going to thank Patrick, though. No, I'm going to thank Patrick. I love it when Patrick's on the show. And of course, our special guest, Matthew, for coming on and having a whole different point of view. Certainly not something I could have talked about in that kind of depth. So thank you, Matthew.
Absolutely a pleasure to do so.
And if you're in BC, you should look up Plugin BC and see what they're doing. See if you can't help them out. Yeah. There you go. And of course, thanks to all of you who watch or listen every week. Download us next week and find out what drives us. Take it away, Michael. See you next week.
Oh, thanks a lot.
Bye.